I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Genesis G80 diesel. 70% as good as the new Mercedes-Benz S-Class for about a third of the price. Really takes them from being premium inside to beyond luxury. Settle into it, lean on that low-end torque and just cruise with the G80. The cabin is so sumptuous that you just relax. It feels like a lot of car for the money. When the second generation Genesis G80 launched in Australia last year, it was missing one thing that buyers were really after, and that was the option of a turbo diesel model. The first generation G80, also known as the Hyundai Genesis, also didn't have a diesel. It only came with a naturally aspirated petrol V6. This time around, the G80 launched with a turbo petrol 4-cylinder and a twin turbo petrol V6 that really goes like the clappers. And both of those engines are fine, even good, but the turbo diesel is actually the best pairing in the G80, as we'll find out later in today's video when we take this vehicle for a drive. It may only be a 4-cylinder, but a ton of sound deadening keeps that from being a problem, and instead it just pulls like a train with heaps of torque underfoot just off idle. But as we'll also find out, the new Genesis G80 is just a really great car if what you want is a big, comfortable, refined sedan. And I'd even go as far as to say that this G80 with the luxury package and the diesel engine is 70% as good as the new Mercedes-Benz S-Class for about a third of the price. And saying it's 70% as good as an S-Class might sound like I'm damning the G80 with faint praise, but I'm not. As I said in my recent review of the new Mercedes S-Class, it seriously is the benchmark for luxury sedans. So even getting that close at a really affordable price for this kind of vehicle is a big achievement. So I'll stop philosophizing about it now. We'll do our usual thing, jump inside, check out the interior, lined in Napa leather. We'll have a look at the back seat, we'll check out the boot, talk about the running costs, and then head out onto the road in the Genesis G80 2.2 diesel. Jumping down into the Genesis G80 is a real feast because this interior is just beautiful. There's no other way to describe it. I ran a long-term GV80, which was nice, but the G80 amps it up even further because you get more wood ornamentation in this interior than you get in the SUV. So you get this band of wood running laterally across the interior, and that's real open pore timber if you go for the luxury package, which this car has. It's 13 grand, which is definitely an expensive option. The car is $87,000 without it, but I reckon you'll want to tick that luxury package box, and that really goes for almost any Genesis model because it really takes them from being premium inside to beyond luxury. So in this car, we have Napa leather on the seats, in the center console, on the airbag cover, on the dashboard, not on the tops of the doors, which I think is a little bit of a miss, but it's virtually everywhere else, and it just looks and feels so sumptuous. The color scheme in this car is Havana Brown on the seats, which is this gorgeous cognac sort of color. And then we have maroon brown up here on the suede headliner, but there's at least 4 color combinations that you can go for in the G80. You can really make this car your own, but I think this is probably how I would go. I think the only element which is going to polarize in terms of the interior styling is the rugby ball steering wheel, which I don't think it's particularly beautiful with this metal trim running around it and the two-tone kind of espresso and tan colors. The G70's sports steering wheel that you can also get on the GV70 just looks better in my opinion, but it's certainly unique. In terms of the technology package, we've got a huge 14.5-inch widescreen up here on the dash, extremely crisp, bright, high resolution. The Genesis software looks cool, it works pretty well. It has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but you've got to plug your phone in via an old style USB port down here. You also have Qi wireless charging if you want to use that. Now, all G80s have a brilliant Lexicon by Harman stereo, which is one of the best stereos I've ever tested in a car. It's clear, it's bassy, and it has a bunch of cool modes that make you feel like you're at a concert, you know, the sound enveloping in front of you, or you can go reference and hear exactly what the artist wanted when they were recording the song. It is a terrific part of the experience, and it really gels with how relaxing this car is to ride in. And even though the temperature is now getting higher here in Australia, we have standard seat cooling, which is great, and it really works. It is cold. Standard seat heating as well in the front, And if you go for the luxury package, you also get heated and cooled rear seats too. In front of the driver, we've got a digital display. It's okay. There was no effort made to put a map or something in there, but what we do have is the Genesis blind spot cameras, which are fantastic and really do show you very intuitively if there's somebody sitting in your blind spot. We've got a panoramic roof up here, and we've got this lovely ornamentation down here on the controls, a rotary dial and a touchpad for the screen, and we've also got like this crystal-like shifter for the 8-speed automatic gearbox. Plus lots of adjustment, particularly in the driver's seat, which does get more adjustment than the passenger, specifically side bolsters and a thigh extender, which make it the more comfortable seat of the two, plus massage. That's something that really should be extended to the passenger seat as well, in my opinion. But apart from that, there's very little to complain about in this bespoke to Genesis interior that certainly doesn't give any clue away that this car is sourced from the Hyundai group. It is really its own thing, beautifully made, lovely to ride in. Let's check out the back seat. For some buyers interested in the G80, it'll actually be the back row which is of most interest to you. And I think that's the case if you're purchasing the car to use as a chauffeur-driven vehicle, or if you're an executive that expects to be driven around on the daily. What life is like back here is critical, and honestly at times it's difficult to remember that this car is only, in inverted commas, $100,000 drive away, because it really does feel as special as a Lexus LS twice the price. The room is perhaps a little bit less, and that's because the G80 is sized more like, I guess, a big 5 Series or a short wheelbase 7 Series than a long wheelbase saloon like a S-Class L or an Audi A8L, but it's still fairly palatial. You can see sitting behind my own driving position, I've got lots of leg room. Tow room is a bit constricted. The front seat does go pretty low and makes the car feel quite sporty as a result. But headroom is fine. I've got enough of it despite the intrusion from this car's panoramic sunroof. If you go for the luxury package, you really do get this kind of executive arrangement here in the back with this flip down console that has Napa leather and more open pore wood, plus a full set of controls here in the middle, plus twin rear seat entertainment. The screens themselves aren't the biggest. They're just under 10 inches a piece, but they work really well. They've effectively got the same software as the front screen. They are touchscreen, but you can also drive it through a duplicate of the front seat rotary controller, which is cool. And we've got buttons here to control either the right or the left. You kind of have to share the same console. We've also got volume, which is cool. Really good sound quality back here as well. Plus we've got heated and cooled outboard seats and the ability to recline the backrest. It does also push the base forward, but it doesn't really change your legroom. It more just changes the angle that you're relaxing on, and it is very relaxing. We've got a power sun blind for the rear window, but if you want to do it to the side windows, got to do it yourself. That said, again, we're only talking about 100 grand here rather than 200,000 or 300,000 in some rivals. Also quite cool, these screens can present your own video. You just have to plug in a source with a USB port between the seats, and there's individual headphone jacks there as well. Plus we've got fan control and temperature control, though it is shared across the whole rear bench. You don't have individual ones for the left and right. Either way though, it's spacious, it's comfortable, and it feels quite tech forward with the rear seat entertainment package. Moving around here to the back of the Genesis G80, I might say a word on the styling, because certainly this sedan is extremely striking. I don't think everybody would call it beautiful. Personally, I quite like the look, and I really like Genesis's new characteristic, like twin blade lighting design for the tail lights and the headlights. And I also really love the spaced out lettering. Had the same thing on my long-term GV80, which I guess this car is sort of the sedan version of. The only thing giving it away as a diesel around the back is the 2.2D badge that I'm sure a lot of people would be tempted to remove. We have an integrated button here in the chrome work to open up the power tailgate, and that reveals a 424 litre boot. We can get all three of our suitcases in there just fine. It's not the biggest boot in the class, but it is serviceable. And underneath that boot floor, you've got a space saver spare as well, which is okay for country touring. A full-size spare would be even better, but being a relatively low slung sedan, it's not the roomiest. Now we do have a couple of netted areas off to the side, and we've got power controls here to shut the boot or to shut it and lock the car. And that means last thing before taking the G80 diesel onto the road is to talk about this luxury sedan's running costs. The running costs for the Genesis G80 are really limited, at least for the first 5 years, as one strategy this brand is using to build up a name for itself is they include a lot of the things that you'd ordinarily pay for, particularly on this car's German rivals or on a Lexus. So the first 5 years of scheduled servicing is complimentary. You also get 5 years of what's called the Genesis Concierge, so you can ring up, make restaurant bookings, hotel bookings, plane bookings, all of that sort of thing included. And much like Lexus offer, you get a courtesy car, so they can come to your office, pick up your G80, leave you with a car, and then return your car to you at the end of the day. The service intervals themselves on the 2.2 diesel are 12 months and 15,000 kilometers, which is par for the course for the industry. But keep in mind, Mercedes-Benz in particular give you a longer interval in terms of distance for servicing something like an E-Class or an S-Class sedan. The warranty on the vehicle is 5 years with unlimited kilometers, and in terms of fuel consumption, the diesel is the most frugal of the G80 lineup. We managed 8 litres per 100 combined, which isn't too bad for a big sedan like this. So why is it that I think the Genesis G80 is 70% as good as the new S-Class at a third of the price? Well, we've already had a look at the striking exterior and the very plush interior, but a lot of the characteristic that I like in the G80 actually comes down to the driving dynamics. Now, if you've been a long-time subscriber, and I certainly encourage you to subscribe down below this video, you'll know that I was fairly critical of the G80 when it first came out for having a tune of the rear suspension that just didn't quite feel tied down enough. Now, that being said, it's important to remember the context, and that was that the G80 was launched primarily around its twin-turbo V6 petrol engine option, and it was also launched on some really challenging roads in rural New South Wales and the ACT. And I actually think what this car is mainly about is not that. It actually can stand up to that kind of punishment, partially because there's really good tyres fitted to the car, but it's actually a really good country grand touring vehicle, and the diesel engine encourages you to tap into that kind of effortless, relaxed cruising rather than kind of frenetic, sporty driving that the 279 kilowatt twin turbo V6 kind of goads you into doing, thereby taking the G80 out of its comfort zone. With the diesel engine, instead, I think almost reflexively as a driver, you just kind of settle back, settle into it, lean on that low end torque and just cruise with the G80, and that's where its strengths lie. And that's sort of true of the Mercedes-Benz S-Class. I think the Audi A8 and the BMW 7 Series give you a sportier option in that segment. Now, of course, at just under 5 meters in length, the G80 sort of splits the difference between a 5 and a 7 Series in size, but its demeanour is much more like an S-Class than a 5 Series. I would say it's like an E-Class, but the way that Mercedes Australia have specified the E-Class on massive wheels and quite softly sprung air suspension means that luxury sedan no longer rides like a Mercedes-Benz E-Class should. Instead, I feel like the baton has been taken up by cars like the Genesis G80, which is really built around just flowing, bobbing ride quality. I do think a little bit more stiffness at the rear end would probably be a good thing, because you can just feel that butt kind of floating at times over big undulations on Australian country roads, but it's certainly not too bad. And the other thing that helps out is there's a really good cushioning effect from the 19-inch wheels that you get on the 4-cylinder G80s. So we've got 275, 40, 19-inch wheels and tyres at the back, and 245, 45 at the front. And so that compares to 20-inch wheels on the V6, and the additional cushioning is really evident on the smaller wheel, despite only being an inch different in wheel size. And that's despite the fact the G80 4-cylinders actually don't have adaptive suspension at all, unlike the V6. We've got fixed dampers, what Hyundai calls high performance dampers, and we have the 4-link, multi-link suspension, both front and rear on this car, and it all comes together really quite well. Now, its limits are not as high as a BMW 7 Series, and especially not as high as sportier versions of the Audi A8. But if you respect those limits and you just flow with the car, it really is a relaxing vehicle to drive. Now, because of its Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tyres, if you turn it in very aggressively, it'll turn, it will go, leaning on its tyres. But you can just kind of feel that isn't really the sort of thing the G80 wants to do all day. Instead, it gives an option to buyers at this end of the market who are after comfort. And that almost sounds oxymoronic, that you wouldn't be after comfort in a large luxury sedan, but the what would I call it, sportification of the car industry in the last 5 or 10 years has convinced manufacturers that everybody wants an AMG line or an M Sport or, you know, an S line or what have you, whereas on certain cars it really does feel more appropriate to have the luxury spec, and that's sort of what the G80 is all about. Now, the diesel engine. It's a 2.2 litre single turbo 4-cylinder. It makes 150 kilowatts of power and 442 newton meters of torque. And, you know, that is really sufficient in a car like this. It may be a 4-cylinder diesel, but Genesis have chocked that engine bay full of sound deadening material. There's acoustic glass and all of that shebang. And it just means that the diesel engine noise is insulated pretty well from the cabin. If you listen carefully, or if you floor it, you can kind of detect that diesel chainy sort of sound, but you know, just driving this car around on low RPMs where its peak torque is found, it doesn't intrude into the cabin. It's really well kept at bay. Now, there are other engines, the 2.5 turbo petrol 4-cylinder, which feels a little strained with the weight of this car, which is just over 1.9 tons. And there is, of course, the barnstorming 3.5 twin turbo V6, but I've already explained why I think that this car, a luxury softly sprung cruiser, is actually better suited to big torque at low RPMs and not as much theatre from the engine, which is what you get in the diesel. So that's why I think it's a good package. The rest of the driving experience, you know, it's good. It's slightly anesthetic at times, but only because the ride is so cosseting and the seats are so comfortable and the audio system is so good and the cabin is so sumptuous that you just relax. Like, you're not really seeking out the apex of every corner, and that's fine. The steering, no feel to it, but it's at least accurate. You sort of cast the brow of this thing kind of over the hill and around the corner, and there's certainly a sense of piloting a large vessel here in the G80. It isn't as big or as wide or as, you know, as tall as some. It's actually quite low slung, but it does feel relatively large on the road, it must be said. But it's super quiet in here. Your butt is kept cold by this seat. Absolutely fantastic clarity from the stereo, and the safety systems are well tuned, so they're not annoying you. They're not causing you frustration like they do in some vehicles. Instead, the lane keep assist is subtle. It holds you in the middle of the lane nicely if you want it. You can turn it off with one touch on the steering wheel. The adaptive cruise control is well tuned. Even the blind spot cameras, they are a perfect example of what makes this car relaxing, because all you have to do is indicate, get a live HD view of your blind spot. You don't even have to turn your head. That sounds lazy, but after running a GV80 for 6 months, the view is so good from the camera that it actually suffices. I mean, look, your head check's illegal. Do your head checks, people. But all I'm saying is the camera is really good. You also get frontwards AEB as standard across the range and reversing AEB, but you only get your reversing AEB on the luxury package, which is unusual and shouldn't be the case. But that's a rare mark against the Genesis G80, a car that with the diesel engine really comes together very nicely. So it turns out that the diesel G80 is the best G80. Well, on paper, the 3.5 twin turbo petrol V6 is an absolute barnstormer. The G80 is actually more suited for the kind of laid back country cruising that a turbo diesel engine is absolutely made for. The body control isn't quite tight enough on the G80 to really compete with the likes of the 5 Series and the 7 Series BMW as a large sports sedan. So I think it's best to embrace this car's actual virtues of comfort, refinement, and just the incredibly relaxing nature of its seats, its sound system, and the huge amount of sound deadening in this car. It all comes together really nicely, and for $100,000 as this car is tested, I mean, it feels like a lot of car for the money. 6 figures is a lot, I'm not going to mince words, but this car has a lot. Keen to know your feedback. Let me know what you think of the G80 down below this video. Is it a car you'd consider buying or perhaps running on a fleet? Let me know. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. Help us get to 100K. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.